Lately, I've been playing a lot of open world games, and I've started to notice that there's a pretty massive distinction between a game being big and it feeling big. The two obviously can coexist, but at least with how I generally approach games, the bigger the world, the smaller it feels. For example, I played Ghost of Tsushima for around 25 hours, and in the early parts of it, I did find myself getting lost in the wonders of the island, exploring the beautiful landscapes, and uncovering various secrets. However, as time went on, I strayed less and less from the main quest, shrinking the vast island of Tsushima down to a nearly linear path. When I look back at it now, I categorize it in the same space as games like Uncharted instead of the explorative open world title it set out to be. Compare this to one of my favorite games from the past few years, A Short Hike. There wasn't a moment while playing where I didn't feel that sense of wonder about what was around the next bend, or have that drive to keep exploring Hawk Peak Provincial Park. When I think about A Short Hike now, it still seems massive and undiscovered. It's one of the few times in games where I've truly become immersed in the world. Looking back, it feels like a grand adventure I once went on. And it only took me an hour to beat. A Short Hike isn't the only small open world game that I've had this experience with. Just in the past few months, I felt it with The Pathless, Alba, and Bowser's Fury. These games all left a huge impression on me, and I felt far more absorbed in their worlds than I did with titles that I played for dozens of more hours. All this has me wondering, how do small open world games feel big? And as counterintuitive as it may seem, I think it actually starts with the fact that they are small. Going back to my issues with Ghost of Tsushima, there were two main reasons I stopped exploring and just focused on the main quest. The first was that, like most games of its size and scope, it repeats a lot of the same ideas over and over again. I understand that a game of this size pretty much needs to do that sort of thing, or else it would just never come out, but there are obviously consequences for it. While I found things like taking out a Mongol camp or tracking a fox to a shrine to be engaging the first few times I did them, they got old somewhat quickly. Also, the rewards for doing these things became less necessary once I had progressed my character to a certain point. So doing these repetitive tasks just to be rewarded with something I didn't really care about didn't feel worth it. And that ties into the second reason I stopped exploring, which was that there were so many side quests, enemy camps, and little secrets to engage with that I got overwhelmed by it all as I didn't know what would be worth my time. So due to the sheer volume of content I could engage with, I opted to ignore most of it. It being a relatively big game ironically made me want to spend less time with it. On the other hand, I knew nothing in A Short Hike would take up too much of my time, as the game is literally called A Short Hike. Knowing that it wouldn't be a massive commitment caused me to want to engage with every aspect of it. I knew my time with it was fleeting, so I wanted to savor the exploration as much as possible. Also, due to it being such a small game, the various things to discover and interact with were all unique, so I found myself more interested in pursuing them. It didn't have the same kind of repeated ideas as bigger games because there wasn't nearly as much space to fill. With shorter titles, I find myself getting far more immersed in the world as every bit of content feels important as there's so little of it. Also, I know I'll have the time to do it all, which is an incentive to actually do it. Furthermore, smaller maps allow me to become more familiar with the area I'm exploring, making it possible to navigate based on my own knowledge opposed to following a marker in the distance. With these kinds of games, I never hit the point of wanting to be done exploring because they typically end before I get anywhere near being sick of them. So when I look back at how they make me feel, I remember the excitement of discovery, where with longer games, when I finish them, I'm often tired of their core gameplay loop and just ready to be done. And unfortunately, that is what I remember most about them. Where smaller games get me to want to keep exploring, bigger ones tend to funnel me down one path, making it so I end up ignoring the vast world around me. Of course, a game being small doesn't ensure that it will feel big. It just provides a solid frame to work with it. More needs to be done to really pull it off. There isn't just one way to accomplish a sense of grandiosity in a small package, but there certainly are things that come up a lot. One of the most notable being how movement ties to the play space. It seems like a lot of bigger open world games aim to have some sense of realism to them, so the main form of movement often ends up being the player character just walking around. Sometimes they'll have a horse or vehicle to add a little more speed and excitement to the mix, but even then, there's little more to the movement than just pressing forward and sometimes mashing a button to go a bit faster. So travel often feels pretty tedious, as getting across a massive map takes time. Smaller titles, however, generally aren't as tied to realism, so a lot of them experiment with movement in really interesting ways. A Short Hike focuses a lot on vertical movement, and the player's core moveset of gliding, climbing, jumping, and flapping complement the design of the world really well. Everything is compact and loops around on itself, and as the player increases their abilities, they're able to more easily traverse the difficult terrain and discover the little secrets spread across the island. Another approach can be seen with the Pathless, which has a system where the player can shoot talismans that are spread across the world to increase their dash meter. It becomes a test of timing and paying attention to one's surroundings, and when done successfully, it leads to fluid movement that makes traversing the world feel good. There's also the ability to glide and fly up higher with the help of the Eagle Companion, and all of this gives a lot of freedom to how the player moves around. This system allowed the developers to add a lot of space between the various areas spread across the map without padding out the game to be hours longer than it needed to be. It's fun to move around, and it doesn't take long to get from one place to the next because the player character is so fast, but at the same time, the world still feels massive because of how much space there is in it. Bowser's Fury has a similar approach. The various zones Mario can explore are on different islands, and he can jump on Plessie to zoom between them. Plessie's movement is fast and loose and really fun to mess around with. Also, there are always coins to collect and conflicts to overcome between the islands, so it gives players something to engage with instead of just mindlessly moving forward. Again, this adds a lot of space in the world without doing it in a way that wastes the player's time. Both Bowser's Fury and the Pathless have another system that makes their worlds feel bigger that comes in the form of conflict. In Bowser's Fury, it can be seen with, well, Bowser's Fury. Every so often, he appears on the map to rain havoc down on Mario. His attacks end either when enough time passes, the player gets a shine, or Mario turns into a big cat and knocks him out. Nintendo is so weird. This setup creates an added challenge for the player, as they not only have to focus on getting a shine, but they also need to avoid Bowser's dangerous attacks. It feels like traversing an entirely new area despite the same space being used. With the Pathless, a massive red cloud constantly moves across the map, and if the player gets sucked into it, they are separated from their Eagle Companion and need to sneak around without being spotted by the boss. Getting caught can take up a fair bit of time and even risk losing certain abilities if the player keeps getting spotted. So avoiding these clouds is really important. Every time one of them would get close, I'd be filled with nervous excitement as I bolted away from it, looking for some sort of cover as to not put myself at risk. The Red Cloud and Bowser's Fury recontextualize the worlds of each game by giving players a new way to briefly interact with it. Both have them retreading the same old ground, but the new lens makes it feel unique, creating a sense that there is more space in the world than there actually is. It's also worth noting that I think systems like these would probably get annoying in a longer game, but as the Pathless and Bowser's Fury are so short, they end before it starts feeling tedious. In a similar yet wholly different vein, Alba also recontextualizes its world as the player continues to explore it, but instead of it coming from a threat, it comes from the game taking place across multiple days. This allows for different events to happen on the island for the player to engage with. Most importantly, each day a new mechanic is introduced, giving the player a fresh way to interact with the world so that running across it doesn't become entirely boring. This lets players become familiar with and connected to the island without getting sick of it. Ultimately, what matters most about a game world feeling big is more about how a space is used than anything else. A Short Hike, the Pathless, Bowser's Fury, and Alba all feel big because I interacted with their worlds in meaningful ways. I actually explored instead of just moving from one waypoint to the next. I didn't have to determine if a side quest was worth my time because there wasn't much time to worry about. Nothing felt padded and nothing felt wasted. Maybe most importantly, when I finished these games, while I did feel like I got enough out of them, part of me also wished they had been longer. And I used to think that finishing a game with that sort of feeling was a bad thing. But now, I kind of want to feel that way. I want to leave wanting more. Obviously, there's nuance to this. Sometimes I wish titles had been longer because they never live up to their potential as they end before actually building on their main mechanics, which is always a bummer. Also, when you bring the cost of games into things, I understand why people get frustrated when they spend $60 on a game that only lasts for a few hours. With that said, in general, I'd much rather finish a game wishing it was longer than wanting it to have ended 10 hours sooner. And look, I'm sure plenty of people don't struggle with big open world games in the same way I do. I know for a fact that tons of folks had no issue getting immersed in worlds like Red Dead Redemption, The Witcher, and Ghost of Tsushima. Everyone looks for different things in games, and that's cool. I just think that the constant push, primarily by AAA publishers, to make bigger and bigger games often ends up creating experiences that don't really encourage the kind of exploration they're hoping players will have. While I don't think by any means that massive open world games should stop being made, I do hope we see more stuff like Bowser's Fury from AAA developers. Tight, open world experiences focused on maximizing every mechanic instead of spreading themselves thin across the biggest digital space imaginable. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, at least with video games, size doesn't matter. It's how you use it. And on the topic of using things well, let's talk about this video's sponsor, ExpressVPN. You probably can't tell by just looking at me, but I'm kind of a private person. And because of that, I don't like the idea of my internet provider or anyone else tracking and selling my browsing information, which is why I use ExpressVPN. VPNs encrypt your data and reroute your internet connection through a secure server so that your information stays private. What's really cool about having a VPN is that due to being able to connect to any server across the world, you can get access to region-locked stuff. For example, if you live in the US and want to watch the 2005 hit show Prison Break on Netflix, you can't. However, through ExpressVPN, you can easily set your location to, let's say, Canada, and ba-boom, Michael Scofield time, let's go! Don't watch past season 1 though. ExpressVPN is super easy to use, and also the connection is really fast. I never have any issues streaming in HD, even when I'm connected to a server halfway across the world. Having a VPN will get you a ton of extra value from pretty much every streaming service out there, so if that's how you watch shows, which, let's be honest, it is, getting one is a no-brainer. So yeah, protect your information and get the most out of your streaming services today at expressvpn.com/Rasputin. And if you use my link, you'll get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. It'll give you more stuff to watch, keep your data private, and give you the chance to figure out whether or not they'll ever break out of prison. You got this, Michael. Anyway, thanks to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. To all of you still here, thank you. It means a lot to have your support. Also, I want to give a big thanks to all of my patrons and a special shout out to Elfinrez for becoming an honorary Bag Butin. With that, I hope you have a great day and or night, and I will see you in the next one.